Hello, basement friends. Ever taken revenge against someone who's wronged you? Ever broken someone's legs for a misdeed? I hope not. Instead, let's listen to these stories about pro-revenge. We'll start with, I froze my psycho neighbor out of her apartment. Subscribe right now, right down below, and let's jump into this. In college, my two friends and I decided to find a place together off campus. We found a beautiful 3-bedroom house with surprisingly affordable rent. The basement of the house was listed as a separate apartment, but as it had a separate entrance and the indoor stairwell had been blocked off, we weren't worried. And the thermostat was upstairs. I feel like that's gonna play into this. Then, the demon neighbor moved in. From upstairs, we could hear everything. This adult woman would call her mother and scream at her to pay for her cell phone bills and give her grocery money. Taco Bell and cheap tequila. She would scream at whatever guy she was with to bring her stuff, and one day, she brought home 3 puppies to scream at, too. We were terrified of this woman and the noise was hell. Also, we were idiotic enough to sign a lease stating we were responsible for all utilities, period, meaning we were now financing her gas, water, and electric. But with only 2 months left on the lease, we thought we could just ride it out. But then she started smoking, constantly. According to the landlord, she'd quit for good when she signed the lease, but for good only lasted 2 days. Our apartment and all our belongings began to reek with smoke. We contacted the landlord because we'd signed for a bloody non-smoking apartment. He told us we lived in a state where you could technically call an apartment non-smoking even if it shared ventilation with a smoking apartment. Screw you, leasing laws. At this point, my 2 roommates were heading out for a 2-week vacation. They were online students while I was residential, leaving me alone in the apartment with the demon smoker in the basement. I couldn't eat or sleep because my idiotic stomach decided to react to all the secondhand smoke by aching and cramping constantly. After 3 days, I was a little insane. I made a plan. I checked the forecast. Low in the 20s all week. I borrowed a friend's ultra-insulated sleeping bag. I bought one of those ski masks with the holes for your eyes and your mouth. I got out my stocking cap, my silk long underwear, my woolen socks, and my down parka. I bought tea, hot cocoa, and ramen, and prepared to live off a diet of hot liquids. I turned off the fucking heat. Day 1, she's screaming at her mother for forcing her to move into this frozen hole of an apartment. Day 2, she's screaming at her boyfriend, supplier, because he won't let her move in with him. Day 3, she's screaming at the landlord about how she's frickin' freezing. Day 4, the landlord is at my door. I greet him in full ski mask, parka, stocking cap array, looking like I'm heading out to rob Santa Claus at the North Pole. He asks me if I don't find it a little chilly in the house. I reply I found all the cigarette smoke a little warm. Day 5, she's screaming about that monster upstairs to anyone who will listen. And I'm sitting upstairs clutching my car keys and pepper spray with 911 typed into my phone. She finally decides she's leaving and moving in with Greg. Even though he just got out for stabbing Travis and he lives in that creepy house in the woods with all those biting dogs. Day 6, she's gone. I silently bless Greg. Moral of the story, there's a bloody reason the rent seems to be too good to be true. P.S. for those wondering, I did have a friend who worked plumbing stop by and give me some advice about how low I could go before I burst the water pipes to heck and back. I don't like that she got puppies to scream at. But I hope you're taking notes, basement friends, because now we're on to Mike finds a way to get rid of a problem employee. The revenge wasn't mine, but I figured I'd share as I was witness to the beginning. Certain names and details have changed to protect the guilty. You're better than me, OP. Background. Years back, I worked for a large bank in the UK. We all worked on the same floor and in the same department, but within different teams. I was just passing through on a secondment and saw the beginning of this revenge, but was filled in on the aftermath later. One of the teams was run by a woman called Sarah. Sarah was, by many measures, a good manager, but she had a blind spot. That blind spot was for a woman called Helen. Now, when I was in my previous role, I interacted with Helen a fair bit, and she seemed friendly, but when it came to actually working with her, she was a nightmare. She'd tattle, steal ideas and credit, and generally throw you under the bus at any opportunity. I'm not sure why Sarah always protected her, but it soon became a sore point for most people on the floor who had to deal with her. Enter Mike, who was the manager of a smaller team. Mike could be a bit of a dick, but he was still professional and fun to work with. To give you an idea of his character, I found out I was being made redundant, and even though he wasn't my manager, he heard about it and booked time out to help me with my CV and do interview practice. Shortly after, it was announced that Mike's smaller team was being dissolved, and the staff was either made redundant or moved to other teams. At the time of the cuts, the economy in the UK was in a bad state, and all the banks were looking for efficiencies. He was redeployed and took the vacant manager role under Sarah that Helen had been gunning for. To make matters worse, Helen now reported directly to him. Helen was furious and spent no time in making her discontent known, as she felt she was entitled to the promotion. Unfortunately for her, Mike was wise to her. He'd even had her blame him for her mistakes before. Shoot, even the projects she'd gotten so much praise for had been work one of his staff had done. So, he started the process of documenting her poor work and attitude to manage her out of the business. Sarah, however, would not allow it. Helen was a high performer in her eyes, and she wouldn't sign off on him getting rid of her. When I left the team, Mike was frustrated with her and wasn't sure what to do. The revenge. I met up with Mike a year later, and he shared how he'd solved the Helen problem with me because he knew of all the issues I'd had with her. Because Sarah had his hands tied, his only other option to get Helen off of the team was for her to leave of her own accord. He couldn't oust her by making her life difficult or she'd go to Sarah, so he went the other way. The mother ducker sat through every performance meeting with her for the rest of the year, gritting his teeth and praising her. That then justified him giving her a really high performance rating. He also used his own contacts to find roles in other teams at his grade that he had then talked up to Helen. These roles were specifically selected because they specialized in one of the things that Helen claimed that she was an expert at, but had very little real experience in. Basically roles where he knew she'd have the highest chance of pooping the bed. Eventually she applied for one, and he spent several weeks coaching her for the interviews. In the company at the time, the interviews were scored off three main factors: performance rating and current role, competency-based interview results, relative experience. He'd done everything he could to make her shine in all three. She took the promotion, and within 2 months she had quit the bank. He knew she wasn't ready for the responsibility, didn't have the skills, and her poor work ethic would be exposed. Worst case, she'd get her stuff together, and he'd still look like the perfect manager to Sarah. That one was creative. I like how he handled it. I like when you get to play a game of people chess and it works out. Saving the best for last, Pastor lies, cheats, steals. He gets exactly what he deserves. Setup. I have been a computer technician for more than 15 years. I have worked on all kinds of computers, everything from tiny point-of-sale computers to large rack server computers. Now we can start. It was about 5 years ago. I had just sat through a long sermon about generosity and giving to those that need help. At the end of the sermon, Pastor Bob asked for an additional donation because the church's roof needed repairs, and it would cost $20,000. That's right, 20,000 freedom dollars for a new roof. After the service, I'm talking to my date. Pastor Bob walks over to me. I said hi, and he introduced himself. We talk for a bit. Pastor Bob asks what I do for a living. I tell him I'm a computer tech with a shop. As I'm telling him, I have a feeling Pastor Bob already knows what I do. Pastor Bob asks me to have a look at his laptop. It's been very slow, so I agree. I turn the laptop on and I hear a clicking noise. This clues me in it's probably the hard drive, but I can still access the data. This is a good thing because it means I can probably recover the data. So I tell Pastor Bob the hard drive is dying and that it needs to be replaced. I also tell him I can probably recover the data. Pastor Bob asks me how much it would cost to fix. I tell him for most people I would charge around $250. However, I feel I can donate my time, so I would just need $60 for a new hard drive. Pastor Bob agrees, so I write up an invoice. New hard drive, $60, labor $0, data recovery $0, and 2 to 4 days for repair. Pastor Bob signed the invoice, thus I take the laptop to my shop. I open the laptop. HP, why do you use so many screws and clips? I get the hard drive out and connect it to my recovery rig. I set up the recovery to clone the data to a new hard drive, but not the new one for the laptop, a high-end storage drive. I go home after locking up the shop. Next Monday, I open the shop and check the recovery rig. It's working, but it will take at least 10 more hours, so I start work on the other tickets. Then at closing time, I lock up and go home. Next day, Tuesday. I've had Pastor Bob's laptop for 2 days. I open the shop and check my recovery rig. Good news! Recovery completed, 100% data recovered. Report says hard drive developed too many bad sectors. Now I had a choice to make. I could put a 1TB hard drive for $60 or a 120GB SSD for $60. Or I could pay some money myself for a 240GB SSD for $100. I decided why not and put the 240GB SSD in the laptop. That's nice. I then clone all the data over from the new recovery storage drive to the new 240GB SSD. An hour later, the clone is done. So I check everything, the laptop works great and is exactly like how it was before the first hard drive died. Even the login still worked. Therefore, I call Pastor Bob and tell him his computer is done. He says that's great and he will be there soon to get it. About 45 minutes later, Pastor Bob walks in, I show him his laptop working and much faster. He loves it and signs the pickup form. He then pays me with a check for $60. It's important he paid with a check. I do a bank run on Monday and Friday. So that Friday at the bank, I am informed that Pastor Bob's check is void. What? Why? Pastor Bob had placed a stop payment on the check. Consequently, I called him and he ignored my call. I go to church on Sunday. Pastor Bob gives a sermon about not lying. I walk up to talk to him and he avoids me. So, I leave and decide I'm going to write it off. I spent $100 and some time to do something nice. A few weeks later, a customer walks in looking for a new computer. To welcome him, I offer him a drink and go over his options. I'm chatting him up a bit and he tells me he is a contractor. He mostly does siding and roofing. He is thinking about offering solar, that's why he's getting a new computer. I ask how much does a new roof cost. He says about $10,000. So I ask him why someone would say $20,000. He had no idea. I thought it was strange. I asked about the church. Contractor said it would have been simple and around $5,000, and he could probably do it for less. Contractor buys a nice new laptop. Sorry the setup took so long. The revenge starts now. Something about what the contractor said bugs me later. Why would Pastor Bob lie and say $20,000 for a new roof? And why would he stiff me for $60? I then remember I never cleared the recovery rig storage drive. I check and there it is. Pastor Bob's laptop data. I look around. It's slow and I'm all caught up on repair tickets. Fittingly, I look around a bit. He had all of his logins stored in a folder on the desktop, including his online dating logins, and online poker. Did I ever mention Pastor Bob is married? I started printing his online dating messages. I look back and find Pastor Bob has been adult hugging several women from his online dating. He had been paying for his dates from the church's donation fund. I'm getting angry now. Then I realized he had adult hugged the woman I was dating when I was dating her. It was then I decided to break Pastor Bob. I printed out all of his dating messages and the women he had adult hugged for the past 6 months, except I refused to print the naughty pictures. It was an impressive packet. I then decided I needed copies of the packet. Therefore, I ordered 100 packets printed from a major online printer. A few days later, my order of revenge packets arrived. These revenge packets are amazing double-sided, staple-bound with a cover of Pastor Bob's face on it. Now the conclusion, and I think it's worth it. This church had a calendar of what the sermon might be about. A perfect Sunday was approaching. I go to church that perfect Sunday. I show up a bit late. Everyone is in church, so I put a revenge packet on each car. I have a few revenge packets that are in yellow envelopes. Fittingly, I put them in the mail. I sent one to all the higher-ups in the church, and I sent a special packet with some of Pastor Bob's pics to Pastor Bob's wife. I set the return address to the church. I also emailed a bunch of people the revenge packet from a burner email. A couple weeks after, I went back to that church. Pastor Bob was gone and so was the wife. Several of the women were also gone, including the one I was dating. I asked one of the important people there what happened. The answer was amazing. I was told about the revenge packet and how everyone had gotten one. The day my revenge packet appeared, the sermon Pastor Bob had given was about the evils of not staying faithful. Thank you, church calendar. Thanks for hanging out today, basement friends. let's do a question of the day today. What's one of your favorite movies? Let me know down in the comments and I'll do the same. And please subscribe. We're still a small channel, so that little bit will do a great amount of help. Alright, I'll see you next time.